The date for Easter falls on the first Sunday after the first full moon on or after March 21st, the spring equinox. Earlier I said March 31st, but it's actually on March 21st. Once again, quoting Browder, at the winter solstice, the sun is at its southernmost position in the celestial sphere. After that date, it begins to travel northward along the ecliptic and at the vernal equinox, or spring. It passes over the celestial equator. This passing over of the sun, SUN, from the south to the north of the equator was the origin of the Easter festival of Passover, or for the Passover. And so it began to make a lot more sense because in those times, I mean, they recognized the importance that the sun played. The sun played a huge part. Everything really rested in the sun because that's where your crops grow. And you started to gain one more minute of sunlight, so you celebrated the fact that the sun is here to give you the abundance. Many Western scholars interpreted this as people worshiping the sun. No. There was, I grew up, and in growing up, I remember the Lord's Prayer, and it says, "Thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven." And Africans looked to the heavens, and they saw that there was a connection between what they saw there and what was going on here. I once heard someone say that there are 9 stars in the universe, in our universe. And there are 9 holes in our body. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. 9 holes in our body. We are the universe. And ancient Africans, ancient civilizations understood this with pure clarity. And that's what formulated a lot of these ideas. It's unfortunately that over years, people began to take this literally and turn these events into actual events that took place. And so this is what I began to share with, in churches. And to be honest, I was asked and was to come and do a lot of studies in churches about this information. My second book, The Way of the Gentiles, is still used in many Bible studies. And we're gonna talk about the second book at another date, but this particular book here was real important. And I want to read something else as I'm going into this. There's a lot of people out here already doing a lot of study as it relates to the origins of Christianity and Africa. But I went on to say, the next segment says Moses and the Egyptians. One of the most important figures stated in the Bible is that of Moses. He was one of the principal teachers and leaders of the Israelites. The mighty law of God is to have been delivered by way of Moses. So powerful was Moses that Jesus says, quote, "For had ye believed Moses, ye would have believed in me." And that comes from John, the book of John 5:46. And the book of John also states of Moses, "For the law was given to Moses." And that comes to us from John 1:17. The 10 Commandments, the exodus of the Jews from Egypt, and other acts of Moses are common events known by Christians and religious scholars alike. However, this is what I said, this is my research. What is not known is that much of the laws that he preached were taken from ancient Egyptians and their practices and rituals. Sure, you can say he went to the mountain and God gave him these laws, but as we will see and as we talk about, many of these things already existed in Egypt. And let's talk a little bit about that. The 10 Commandments were not new to the world when Moses, according to scripture, received them from Mount Sinai. They were known to the ancient Egyptians, or Cometians, as they were called, centuries before his birth. In fact, they were just part of what is known as the Negative Confessions, written nearly 1300 to 1350 years before Moses. According to one of my favorite scholars from back in the day, the late Reverend Ishaka Musa Bereshango, the Ten Commandments were known as the 147 negative confessions, as set forth in the 125th chapter of the Egyptian Book of the Dead. So they were able to go to this Egyptian Book of the Dead, went to that chapter, and instead of saying thou shalt not kill, thou should not steal, the negative confessions was I did not steal, I did not kill, I did not commit adultery. It was more of a negative confession, but there were 125 of them, okay, in Egypt. And so let me continue on with this. Moses not only received the commandments from the Egyptians, he was taught by them as well. One of his teachers was the great Pharaoh Amenophis. If I put the pronunciation on the wrong term, I apologize. Better known as Akhenaten, the heretic king. Living about 1350 years before Jesus, Akhenaten was regarded as the first Messiah and the most remarkable of the pharaohs. Akhenaten was one of the first to practice monotheism, the belief in one God, and revolutionized the Egyptian religion by worshiping the sun's disk, or Aton, A-T-O-N. Up until that time, there were many different graven images being worshipped and a strong belief in polytheism, the belief in many deities. But according to J.A. Rogers, he states that 1,000 years before Moses wrote the second commandment banishing graven images of God, Akhenaten did so. Known as an outstanding poet, much of Akhenaten's poetry is contained in the Book of Psalms. Rogers writes, Psalms that read like those of the Bible were written by Pharaoh Amenophis IV, better known as Akhenaten, the heretic king, 1300 BC or more, than 400 years before David was born. Akhenaten was extremely Negro in type. And Akhenaten would eventually be killed by the enemies of his day, but his philosophy did not die. The young Egyptian priest named Moses, a disciple of Akhenaten, picked up the cause of following the practices of monotheism, one God, Aton occult, and fled out of Egypt, where it was being suppressed. I'm almost finished. Just one last paragraph here. As mentioned above, Moses was an Egyptian. Let me repeat that. Moses was an Egyptian. This may come to a surprise for most people, but his very name, Moses, is an Egyptian rather than a Jewish name. In fact, he was educated in Egypt by the Egyptians. Noted historian and philosopher George G. M. James stated that all the great leaders of the great religions of antiquity were initiates of the Egyptians' mystery system, from Moses, who was an Egyptian hero. I don't know how you pronounce this. Hierogrammat. I guess something about hieroglyphics and grammaticals or something. I think it's a word put together like that. All the way down to Christ himself. So all of them were initiates of this system.